Hey, is everyone okay? Today's been crazy with the storm and everything.
Me and Paula are good.
I'm okay. You okay, Julia?
Parts of my school have water in them, some of our trees fell down, and I can't go home because our street's flooded. But other than that, I'm good.
I'm really angry though. My school was literally flooding, yet our admin refused to cancel and our teachers tried to continue class, but no one could focus.
Some teachers and students left earlier in the day, but now people can't even get into the school property because the water's so high.
This happened here too, but we're okay. No one got seriously injured.
Dude, that's so bad. That's exactly what it looks like at my school.
Here's the water starting to come into my school, but we stopped videoing after this when it got bad. Sorry I don't have the worst of the damage documented for you.
That's terrible. Were you scared?
Yeah, a little scared. Mostly just not knowing how to react because we've never been physically at school for this before. We're usually home. And it reeks of mold at my school. It's disgusting. It smells like wet dog.
That's really bad for everyone's health to breathe that in, too.
Julia and Devin, will you get stranded at school overnight?
I think I'll be okay, but my friend from across town is telling me that she doesn't know if she can get home because the buses might not be running. One bus filled with passengers already flooded.
I walk to a friend's house, and I'll wait there until my dad can come pick me up. He usually takes South Braeswood to get me, but obviously he can't do that today. It's already flooded and the police blocked it off.
Yeah, and if the bayou overflows, South Braeswood will be a river. My friend sent me this.
Yeah, that was going around.
This is crazy.
Have you seen all the Snapchat and Instagram stories? Everyone is acting like this is completely normal.
Just another day in Houston, man.
Yeah, and that's the strangest part of this. It's not strange at all. We've convinced ourselves that this is normal. This was inspired by the actual text conversation our Houston activist team had on September 19th of last year during Tropical Storm Imelda. While our peer activists across the world scrambled together last-minute plans for the September 20th global climate strike, we were wondering if we would even make it to City Hall for our strike the next day, having to cancel months of work because of a storm that came on us with frightening force and very little warning.
It's something we've become accustomed to in our frontline city, lowering our expectations that we will have the capacity to fight the climate crisis in traditional ways because climate disasters are beginning to overpower us.
Eventually, we were able to get home, and by that evening, most Houstonians were safe at home. However, when we arrived at City Hall the next day, the majority of the city was stuck in their homes as floodwaters swamped the highways and the streets, and school districts across the greater Houston area closed on the 20th. So while millions skipped school and work worldwide in response to the climate crisis, the crisis kept hundreds of thousands of Houston kids out of school involuntarily that same day.
And while our team striked together, we found it tragic that hundreds of students who planned to join us couldn't. Students who had very similar text conversations and social media posts as we did, expressing outrage at our city for putting us in harm's way by leaving us at school the day before, outrage at the fossil fuel industries, fueling a crisis that isolated us from our families while our parents worked, and we panicked at school. Outrage at older generations who didn't talk about the storm in the context of climate change like we were doing across the city.
Yeah, that lack of mainstream acknowledgement about the link between Imelda and climate change, and that link between climate change and our Hurricane Harvey, Memorial Day flood, Tax Day flood, and more in the past 4 years. This signals the normalization of the tremendous flooding we face here.
So many students and parents took to social media to show flooded homes and cars, streets transformed into rivers, but while there was a clear sentiment of distress, the words climate crisis didn't show up often enough. That day, people said, well, that's Houston for you. That day, people accepted and decided that Imelda was just a consequence of living in Houston. It's not. It's a consequence of the crisis.
It shouldn't be normal to be stranded at school. It shouldn't be normal to climb on your countertop while your home floods, to wade through sewage water teeming with bacteria, and then to wear scars for months afterwards on our legs from the infections. It shouldn't be normal to muck out our neighbors' homes. It shouldn't be normal to crowd into bathroom stalls at school, comforting our friends with anxiety every time a thunderstorm breaks out.
It shouldn't be normal to be afraid of rain.
When we look at our city, We remember neighborhoods by those who have been hit the hardest. Our childhood hangout spots, our community grocery stores, often in immigrant communities, the heart of Houston's diversity, now bittersweet memories. These businesses shuttered after flooding and not receiving enough federal funds to rebuild and raise their property. The most familiar street names to us are those that we know not to drive down during a flood.
That's a really great point about street name connotations. It exposes how the climate crisis manifests in our collective Houston consciousness and enters our conversations, especially when we talk to people during and after the floods, asking people where they drove, how they fared, sharing similar stories. Yet people still don't realize that this shared mindset, the shared culture of reacting to flooding, results from the climate crisis.
What we've come to understand as a team of frontline youth activists is that the normalcy of natural disasters creates a culture of acceptance, which disguises both the influence of the crisis and the fact that we've normalized the crisis.
In 2015, they told us that this was a once in a 500-year storm. And then it happened again the next year. And then the following year, Hurricane Harvey hit, which was supposed to be a once in a 1,000-year storm. We got a 1-year break, and then the tropical storm Imelda made landfall. To much of our community, and to so many other communities across the world, the climate crisis has become too normal to become scared of. We're too used to losing our homes, to hearing stories about people who drove in the wrong street, to school being canceled, to watching our local businesses, community centers, places of worship flood and close. It's threatening the diverse culture of our city.
As COVID-19 has become a reality around the world, Houstonians have been hit with a sense of deja vu. We've worn N95 masks before, as we mucked out our houses.
We know what it is like to not know when school will open again.
We know what it's like for the whole city to be shut down.
We know what it is like to live in isolation, stranded at home as our streets are filled with water and our cars and public transport flood.
We know what it's like for government's systematic racism and lack of prior investment in communities of color in our city to result in disproportionate impacts during a disaster.
We know what it's like to be distrustful of FEMA, because when FEMA was supposed to provide bailouts and funding for home repairment and hour raises, our neighbors and classmates are still waiting for the money 2.5 years later.
And we know what happens when you shirk caution. With Tropical Storm Imelda, we didn't think it would be as bad as it was, and we were caught off guard. Just like we didn't listen to the warnings of our scientists about COVID. We didn't act until it was too late with Imelda and students suffered. This is our message from the front lines of one crisis to the front lines of another. We cannot afford to make the same mistake with the coronavirus. We cannot continue to make these mistakes with the climate crisis.
The injustice of normalizing crises is felt most adversely by our youth, who recognize and reject the many ways that the climate crisis manifests in our daily life in the months after one storm, just waiting for the next deluge. It's a problem entrenched in human minds, and we are tired of being the only generation of Houstonians to recognize it.
We're terrified of the threat of another storm, another climate disaster happening in a few weeks from now, the start of the hurricane season, while social distancing still occurs, while FEMA invests all its money and efforts into responding to COVID, while our local government remains distracted. Here in Houston, where two crises converge, this is the prelude to what the climate crisis has in store for us all. Internationally, back-to-back disasters, simultaneous crises that exhaust our resources and our communities that take lives.
We need climate action at the front lines, and we need it today.